Okay, good afternoon, everyone. It's a sunny day here in Basel. What a great way to start the week, right? Welcome to today's webinar hosted by Magnolia. Today we'll talk about GDPR, modern privacy controls in Magnolia. I am your moderator, Cass Weber, a Magnolia trainer, and I will guide you through today's program, monitor any technical issues, and later on we'll assist in the Q&A session. Now, we have allotted some time for that, so make sure to keep your notepads at hand, or you may also start sending in your questions in the Q&A tab. Now, you should find that tab on your screen. Remember, Q&A tab, not the chat tab, okay? So while the presentation is ongoing, you can always do that one. Our presenter today is Antti Hietala, a product manager at Magnolia. He will briefly discuss what GDPR is in a nutshell, and then dive right into handling cookies forms, exporting and deleting personal data, as well as, showing you several cool demos. So make sure to stay tuned. All right, so GDPR, you know about it. Everybody knows about it. You must have received tons of email regarding the change in policies. The big question now is, what about Magnolia as a product, Magnolia on premises? How are you as users or developers of Magnolia affected by all these? Now, what do you need to know exactly all that with Antti? So I'm handing you over now to Antti.
Thank you, Cass. Also welcome from my part. We'll be talking about personal data today. What does it mean and how Magnolia helps you comply with GDPR? And we're going to start off with quick introduction. You can find me at my Twitter handle or send me email to Magnolia to provide feedback on any of the GDPR features that you see today. And we'll be kind of sticking to this agenda here. We'll talk about GDPR as a legislation or regulation in a nutshell, and I'll try to keep it very light on that part because it's quite dense legalese, and we are not lawyers, which are not most of you either, but we focus on what the product can help you with. We'll look at client-side consent management in form of cookies. We'll look at server-side consent management on how you should check content on a form when a form is submitted and how to ask the user for permission to use that data. We'll look at exporting and deleting your personal data, and we'll spend most of the time on the product, not so much on the slides.
Sounds good.
And we'll start with a little quote from the GDPR regulation itself. The protection of natural persons in relation to the processing of personal data is a fundamental right.
That sounds like basic human rights.
It is,
right?
It is. That's the intention of the regulation, that what belongs to people, their personal data, should be considered equal to right to health, to right to nutrition, to right to privacy. It's quite a key concept in European legislation. And the kind of Uber principle is that people themselves should be in control of their data. Not the companies that use that data or marketeers, but those who the data belongs to. And we'll start with a few definitions here, just to rattle through this, not in too much detail. So GDPR itself is a regulation. It's a legal text that tries to harmonize data privacy laws in the European Union and also reshape how organizations approach data privacy. And since it concerns with personal data, it also defines what personal data is. And these are things like your name, your location, any cookies that store personal information about you, ID numbers, IP addresses, sometimes things that you wouldn't imagine being personal alone, but once you put 2 or 3 of those items together, you can identify who the person behind them is, like age and zip code and your dog's name, perhaps. And GDPR applies to any company that wants to do business in the EU. And that's a bit of a puzzler, because even if you as a company are operating, let's say, out of Singapore, but you're offering your goods or services to EU citizens, then GDPR applies to you and you must comply.
So regardless of where the company is located, you must adhere to this GDPR.
Correct. If you want to do business in the EU, then that's the lay of the land. And those definitions out of the way, there are two key roles in GDPR, controller and processor. And the controller is the one who determines the purposes and means of processing personal data. And purpose means, why are we doing it? Means is, how are we doing it? Typically, Magnolia clients like you guys in the audience there who run sites or manage sites for clients are controllers. You'd, for example, decide that we need to collect visitors' email addresses. There's the purpose, the why, so that we can send the marketing messages. And the means is you might collect them with Magnolia. Means is often the tool that you use. Means could also be your marketing automation system where you push this data, where you store.
Got it.
And we, Magnolia International as a company, is also a controller because we have our own corporate website. We collect lead data like most companies out there. So we need to acknowledge our role as a data controller. Then the other role is processor, and that's somebody who processes the data, stores it, moves it from one place to another. And those folks are typically Magnolia partners or hosts. Regardless of where you host it, you might host the Magnolia site on Amazon or in your own data center. But if you collect and process EU citizens' data, then you are a processor.
So now we know the difference between the controller and processor. Thanks, Antti.
Correct. And here's a little fun thought exercise of how to think about personal data. This comes courtesy of Tim Walters. He came up with this idea that collecting personal data is like borrowing your neighbor's car. And like you should tell the neighbor why you need their car. For example, I'm going shopping to Germany, I need your car, can I borrow it for the day? In a similar fashion, you say, we need your data in order to serve you personalized content on this website. Be transparent and obvious about it. This is the openness principle. You should say, how far are you going to drive? Say, I'll be away for the whole day, about 50 kilometers in the meter. We're going to store your data for a month. That's the parallel of driving 50K versus storing for a particular retention period, the personal data. You certainly shouldn't give your car to somebody else to drive without checking with the owner first. You might say, is it okay if my friend will drive? Or is it okay if we share your personal data with IBM? We're going to push it to a Watson marketing automation system. So it's going to leave our hands and go to this partner. That is kind of important for the person who owns the data. You should also tell if you change your plans. For example, you might call your neighbor, I'm really sorry, the traffic is horrible. Can I return your car tomorrow? The parallel to GDPR is, we're also going to send you some product offers in email.
Right.
So maybe there's another purpose that you're going to use the data for that you didn't disclose in the beginning. You should keep them up to date. And the last one is, don't use the car for anything the owner wouldn't. For example, don't go to the garden store and shovel the trunk full of garden soil. You probably shouldn't sell personal data to anybody else either. So pretty common sense rules there, but a fun thought exercise.
Mm-hmm. And
next, let's look at what we have on the roadmap. So we put this card on the Magnolia public roadmap a few months ago, where we detailed the bullets or the requirements that we would like to support in the product. And here you will find things like show what personal information the site collects and for what purposes. So the product should support that. Ask the data subset for consent when collecting personal data. We'll dig into the concept of consent in a moment. Provide a granular choice of the data you wish to share.
Do you mind elaborating on that one?
So granular means you have several pieces of personal data that you might want to share or the company might want to use. And you should have a choice, separate choice about each of them. Let's say on the first engagement you share with your name and email. If they also want to use your street address, then they need to ask you. That's the idea, that you get a separate choice about each piece of data.
Cool.
Then consent should be validated through double opt-in. Double opt-in is this method where you send an email to the person concerned. They click a link in the email and return to your site. And Magnolia will support that for all the relevant GDPR functionality. Recording a history of consent and actions, respecting the subject's right to be forgotten. Mm-hmm. You may be familiar with this idea that you may have put some content on the internet and you might not want it to be there anymore. So you should have the right to erase that data. Similarly, you can ask for a company and say, I'm done with you. Can you erase my data, please? Mm-hmm. And finally, exporting personal data on request. So we'll look at those in the product in just a moment. And we're going to start on the client side. The client side consent management deals with cookies, how you should deal with cookies under GDPR. And the governing principle is that you should be transparent. Be clear of how you're going to use and be obvious about it. Tell your visitors that your website does use cookies and what you use them for. Kind of letting the visitor be informed. And if your cookie stores personal data, ask for consent. Now there are different kinds of cookies out there. There are some cookies that are perfectly harmless, benign, session cookies, for example, that are not considered personal data. But when you start storing things like gender or your favorite flavor ice cream, then those are about you. They are personal data. Mm-hmm.
I wanted to ask something about this one. So what if the user ignores the banner or however you present it, or say, for example, does not press the OK button? How can this be handled in Magnolia, or how does Magnolia, the product, handles this one?
Right. So my recommendation would be that if the user does not acknowledge and accept cookies, then don't set them. Mm-hmm. Don't set those cookies that store personal data. You can still set cookies that are simply for tracking a session and that are exempted from GDPR. But I would respect the choice of the user and not set something that stores personal data.
Of course.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And Magnolia gives you that option. It'll also give you the option to just go ahead and set cookies, but I wouldn't recommend that. It doesn't get in the way of how you interpret your level of compliance.
All right, thank you.
And we've created a new app, Cookies app, where you can manage your cookies. And we're going to look at that in a moment. So let's hop into the product itself. I'm going to exit from here and pull up the travel demo. Here we're looking at the travel demo homepage on the Magnolia public instance. And you're all familiar with the content, but what we get here at the bottom now is new. So there is this cookie prompt, a little explanation of that this website uses cookies to ensure you get the best experience. Now you can of course control that message, make it read what is relevant to you and your visitors and to your site. You can also configure what this box looks like, where it appears, and I'll show you that configuration in a moment. There's a link to a page where the visitor can learn more about what cookies you set on the site. Now it just links to an example URL, but what you should do is create a special page on your site that lists the cookies that you set and the reason why you do that. Mm-hmm. And here on the right are then ways for the visitor to act on it, give their consent or deny their consent. The way I've configured this right now is they can either decline consent, say deny cookies, don't set any, I'm not okay with this, or dismiss. Yeah, I got it. I understand what cookies are and you can set them as you please. So let's have a look at what happens when I deny. Now the prompt goes away, and when I inspect the cookies on this site, I can see that we have a session cookie, which is one of the harmless benign ones that doesn't track personal data. And then we've set a special cookie called cookie consent status, and we've given it a value deny. So that was the result of my clicking of deny. And now if I browse through the site does not set any other cookies. It respects that decision that I have denied. If I delete that guy, and let's go through the exercise again.
Mm-hmm.
Now I say, yeah, I got it. Now our cookie consent status is set to dismiss. That's kind of the okay, I got it value. And when I browse through the site, all sorts of other cookies are now allowed and are being set on the site, such as, is this a returning visitor, Google Analytics cookies,
Mm-hmm.
and other marketing type cookies. So that's the basic premise of how you can ask for consent for cookie management. And we're going to go to the slides for a quick reflect back, because I've got some examples of here how other companies do this that may be helpful for you. So here's a company called Ace and Tate that sells eyeglasses and sunglasses around the globe. And they put together such a special page that lists the cookies that we set on this site and have categorized them. So some are strictly necessary cookies, and then there are other cookies for analytics and marketing purposes and so on. Here's another example from a health company that allows you to opt into particular categories of cookies. And you may have seen this kind of practice popping up on the internet. Yeah. Where you say, I'm okay with the necessary ones, and yeah, okay, maybe with the statistics ones, but don't store any marketing related information about me. And here's an IBM example where they even have a nifty slider of kind of the extent that you're willing to go with accepting cookies, ranging from required to advertising cookies. So those are examples of how you could configure cookie categories and how you can be transparent about the choice.
And all these you can apply in Magnolia.
Yeah, so let's go ahead and look at the cookies app. So now we are on the author instance, and we're going to pull up the cookies app. It's here in the tools group. And this new app allows you to configure cookies. The cookies that you typically see in Magnolia, that Magnolia uses it for itself, are here. We've migrated them into this app, and we've also given you examples of how to list other kinds of cookies. So here we have the cookie consent cookie itself, which stores the visitor's response to the consent question. We have an example cookie for Google Analytics. So let's open that up and see what the app looks like. So these are typical cookie properties that adhere to the cookie spec. The name in the browser, how the cookie appears to the browser user if they inspect the page, what sort of values you can, what domain and path and so on. And then this is the important part, the consent required bit. This is a regular expression where you can control what kind of consent does it require for this cookie to be set. And you can check for categories here. You could say any, say whatever the visitor has said to the consent question, set this cookie anyway. So that could be relevant for those functional cookies, the benign ones. Or you could use a regular expression like, let's say you say allow or marketing or statistics. Mm-hmm. If any of those values are present in the consent, then this cookie gets set. So you can be pretty fine-grained and open about what sort of categories you have and react to them here. So the cookies app works like that, and we've configured a few example cookies here. And the way this reacts or relates to the JavaScripts that typically set cookies is we've connected it to the marketing tags app. Many, many times, almost typically the cookies set on your site are set by some kind of marketing tag, such as a Google Analytics snippet, or another type of analytics. We have a clicky example here, or your marketing automation system. And we've chosen a way to work that goes like this. We don't add the marketing tag on the page unless the visitor has consented to the cookies that the marketing tag sets. And the cookies are listed here. You can select them from the cookies app. So to take this example, for example, Google Analytics relies on a few cookies. Here we have 3 examples: GA, first page view, and event queue. And I've connected all these cookies to the Google Analytics marketing tag. So Magnolia will check if the user or the visitor has agreed, given consent to all those cookies, or to a category called statistics, for example, then this marketing tag gets added to the page. So this is a pretty nice way to control what tags get added per is the cookie consent given. So that's kind of the marketing tag, the client side. Magnolia also allows you to set cookies on the server side, and there's an API for the cookie consent management. You can always check from your Java code, should I be setting this cookie? Has the visitor given consent? And we're going to move on to the next topic from cookies, which is GDPR and forms. And Cass, you were referring earlier to the barrage, the flood of emails that you have been hit.
Right.
I know they sometimes, on that day when the legislation went to effect on May 25th, it felt like every 2 minutes you get a GDPR email in your inbox. It was just crazy flood. And these were companies changing their privacy policies.
Exactly.
And we're going to look at consent in terms of form collection next. So we referred to something called double opt-in earlier, and that fulfills the criteria that the consent must be genuine. You should be sure that the person or the visitor who gave consent to somebody's email is actually that person. And you can do that by double opt-in. Send them an email link, then they click it, you know for sure that that person who opened the email actually owns that address.
Now, what if the user failed or fails to respond to double opt-in? How can this be handled in Magnolia?
I think the right way to handle is that you don't do anything. You don't act on it until that double opt-in link is clicked. Let's say that the user missed it, didn't see it, or it went into the spam box or something like that happened. Mm-hmm. Just sit tight and don't check the consent given until they've acted on it. And consent must also be valid, and valid means you can't impersonate another person. I could go on the site and say, I give consent for this email address, Cass Weber. Mm-hmm. But once the opt-in email goes in, you will obviously see that I haven't been requesting this. This was not me, and you can not act on that link. So consent must be genuine and valid, and Magnolia will support both through the double opt-in. Here's an example of a typical lead form flow. So this is how you would apply GDPR on your website to a form. You probably have a form somewhere on the site to contact the company or to request the brochure or get in touch with fill a survey, or just get in on the phone with a rep. You collect some personal data on that form, typically an email address. Tell the visitor how you're going to use that data. And that's best done directly on the form. For example, a little text field next to the form or on the field itself. When they submit that form, ask for double opt-in, that email comes in, you act on the link, and then you store the consent on Magnolia side. Or in practice, you probably always push this into a marketing automation system or a CRM instead. And I will show you how Magnolia gives you an example how to do that. All right. So let's go to the demo again. And now we're going to work on the author side. We're going to go to the Pages app. And by the way, here in the homepage properties are the configuration options for that cookie pop-up what we just saw. So you can choose the type of compliance you are asking for, just a dismiss button or deny versus accept and so on. We give you three options here: informational, opt out, or opt in. You can configure the message that is shown on the form, what those buttons read, and where the more information link should take you. You can also configure the way that script looks like. We are not the original authors of that script. We use the script that is widely used on the web for this purpose from this company here. And they provide an excellent script, excellent JavaScript for this purpose. So we adopted it, included it in the product. See, they use it themselves at the bottom here, and it has lots of configuration options and a very nice JavaScript API.
Cookies in here, okay.
Yeah. So back to the form consent. We've put an example here on the contact form. So let's open that up and let's fill it in to see what consent looks like on a form. On this little simple form, we ask for name, email, subject, and a message. So let's start filling it in and look how it works. So this is a travel site. So let's say, could you please send me a brochure about Antarctica? So this is a typical little request on a contact form. And when I submit it, some of these fields are configured in Magnolia as personal data, name and email. And I'm being asked for my consent. I give my consent to collect and store the following personal data: name, because your name identifies you uniquely; an email address, because we may send you a newsletter or other marketing messages. And now this wording that you see here is just example of wording how you could be transparent and obvious about it, the data collection. You can configure it as you wish, use the kind of labels and help text as you like, but just be transparent and kind of obvious about it. Say, this is why we collect your email address. We may send you a newsletter.
It's the best way to go.
Yeah.
Be transparent.
And you can also configure the duration of the consent. So you may keep this information for 24 hours or 1 month, and you can add more options to this drop-down. The way you configure this is documented in the Magnolia documentation. So let's say I'm okay with you using my name and email address, and I submit the form. Now what happens is that I need to check my email for that double opt-in. So I have configured a little GDPR email inbox here, where an opt-in email arrived. Now this is just a basic demo message here that we received your information through the form. To confirm your consent, follow this link. And I return back to Magnolia, and here I can click proceed to confirm my consent. Now we've collected all sorts of other use cases also on this same page, and the first initial feedback I got about this is it's a bit confusing. So we're going to split these into separate pages to make it easier for people to understand. But the first proceed button is here where I need to react. Thank you, we've registered you. And now what happened in Magnolia is we registered this visitor in a new app called Visitors, because it's important that we keep track of who the visitors are and what personal data is related to them. So this is kind of where you can manage consent. So Antti just said that it's okay for us to use his email address and name, but not these other personal data fields. And in Magnolia, you can configure which fields in all the Magnolia apps that you have are personal data. The configuration is here in the configuration app. So if you look under Visitor Manager, you can say in the config, scroll a little bit there, which workspaces contain personal data and which fields there. We reference to the field name to know whether this is a personal data field or not. And this is just an example of how you could do it within Magnolia apps. But as I said earlier, in practice, you probably push this information to another system, a third-party system like IBM Watson Marketing Automation or a CRM system.
Now let's say we stick to Magnolia. Now, say for example, Antti wants you to forget his, what did he have in there? He allowed the email address. So maybe one day he wants you to forget the email address. So all you have to do is revisit this app, the visitors app, and then put it back to the denied list, or am I right?
Correct. So the visitor needs to have granular control.
Exactly, going back to that.
So that's why we had on the form 2 separate checkboxes. For every single personal data fields, you have the option to configure separate consent. Say, I'm okay with you using my email address, but not with my street address. So don't send me any paper mail, for example.
And later on, he can also change his mind and say, hey, take that one out. Good.
And as an example here in the demo, we've connected visitors to a place where you might want to store such personal data, and we repurposed the Contacts app. So as I submitted the form, a record was created here in Contacts as well. And I encourage you to think of the Contacts app as that third-party system somewhere else, a CRM system or marketing automation system. And we will next ship an example using IBM Watson for this, where instead of storing a record in Contacts, we will show you how to send that record into Watson Marketing Automation, and in there set a flag like, this visitor has agreed to us using their email address, but not their street address, for example. So there's a form processor example that allows you to push into a remote system and set a particular flag there. And it's important for the marketer who works in that third-party system to know what data can they use. The email address is okay, street address not, and so on. All right. Let's move on with the next use case. So that was our lead form use case, then exporting personal data. I found this funny tweet about Santa collecting information about who's been naughty, who's been nice, and sharing that personal data with third parties like mom and dad and grandparents. That's totally violating GDPR. And GDPR Article 5 says that the individual has the right of access, which requires companies to detail what personal data is being processed and how upon request. So in order to satisfy this, we thought, how can Magnolia support you in showing what personal data do we have about visitors? And we implemented an export function that is available to the visitor themselves. So let's go back to Magnolia. Now we've registered Antti as a visitor. We know his email address and his name. We need to give him the option to export that personal data. So here's a little example page with a simple form that asks, whose email data are we exporting? In this case, we identify the person by email address. We decided to use email address as the unique identifier.
Okay.
I mean, it's not completely anonymous. I mean, it's actually not anonymous at all. But rather than having a UUID, we went with email address because for the ease of the marketer and the admin, it's better that they can find these people and can respond to requests, such as when somebody calls the call center and says, please forget everything about me or export my data. We want to find this person quickly. GDPR even specifies that such requests need to be reacted to without delay. Yeah, that's a little bit vague.
As soon as possible.
It's a little vague, but we thought, let's make it obvious for the marketer at least. So I'm going to request for my data to be exported. And the request is reflected in my email inbox. So we have a new message here now, which has an attachment that I'm going to download. And let's see what it looks like on the file system. So that's where it landed. Let's open that zip. And here we have a machine readable extract of the personal data that we have on that visitor. And GDPR specifically says it's okay that it's machine readable. It doesn't need to be human readable. And this is clearly not very easy to read. But you can do it, you can process it, you can script it, and so on. And if you ever requested your data from Facebook, I did it the other day.
All right.
It exported a very similar package with all the posts that I ever made, all the pictures I've ever shared. It was all there, returned back to me, nicely packaged. So we're trying to mimic that here. So here we have the email address, the first name, the last name, the items that we collected.
Exactly. And if this is you, you can identify yourself anyway. You can go through it, understand a little bit of it.
Yeah. And let's clear the inbox a little bit here as we go to the next item. And the final use case that I'll show you today is the right to erasure, or the right to be forgotten. We've all got some embarrassing photos online that we'd rather did not exist there anymore. It's also kind of a human need or right to be forgotten. People forget things about deeds done at some point, and it's fair enough that we reflect that on the web. So we have an example page here that allows you to forget me. I can request the site to forget my data, basically erase it. And this works very similarly to what you just saw. I say, please forget everything about Antti. Submit the request. And again, it's double opt-in so that we don't delete somebody's data who doesn't want it to be deleted. I need to react on it. Please delete. And what has happened now is in Admin Central, we've removed Antti from contacts. We've removed the visitor record. It's gone. The visitors app is now empty. We've cleaned up the personal data that was there. Had it existed in other apps or perhaps in multiple apps, from that visitor, we have references to all those apps, all those workspaces and fields where we store that data. So we can erase it with a single click like this. And the example that we've built with the Contacts app is something that you need to follow also with those third-party systems. So if you push this data to a CRM system, you need to send a signal at least to that system, say, please delete this person's personal data.
So now Antti has been forgotten.
I'm gone, totally gone.
Without a trace.
Yes. And just to reiterate that last point there, why GDPR thinks the right to be forgotten is important. It goes back to that Uber principle that people should be in control of their own data. And if I want that data to be erased, please grant me that option.
Correct.
All right, so that was a quick overview of the GDPR compliance features in Magnolia. And let's take some questions.
All right. So let's see. I have first question here from Michael Buchele. So about cookies, are filter selections seen as personal data?
You have to think about what you store in that cookie. Let's say that you have a site that sells ice cream and you're asking me my favorite ice cream flavor, for example, and that might be a filter. Strawberry, chocolate versus vanilla, and I say strawberry. And later on, you're asking me, where do I live? What is my zip code and what is my gender? Based on three unrelated things, you can pinpoint pretty much a person. So if let's say you ask for a filter selection in isolation and you forget it promptly when you don't need it anymore, I'd say, no, it's not personal data. In the travel demo, we have this tour preference example. On the front page, we ask you, what tour type are you? So it's this question here, active, cultural, off the beaten path. I'd say this is similar to a filter selection. When I click cultural, I get a cookie, tour type cookie that says cultural. Alone, pretty benign. I wouldn't be worried about it. But I also wouldn't persist it for very long. Only maybe during the session, and then expire it. And so on. Thank you, Mikhail, for that question.
He has another question though. It's a little bit technical, but let's just try. How are marketing tags added to the page? Is this done dynamically by JavaScript?
Yeah. So Magnolia injects them into the page HTML before it is sent to the browser. And you can control marketing tags in the marketing tags app that we saw here. Let's take this Google Analytics tag, for example. You can say where in the HTML it should be inserted, into the header, beginning of the body or end of the body. What exactly to be inserted, that's typically the content, which is the tag itself. The tag word, by the way, is a little bit confusing because people refer to lots of things as tags.
Exactly.
But the marketers that we speak with often refer to these kind of things as marketing tags. Oh yeah, Google Analytics, that's one of our marketing tags.
Okay.
And you can say where to insert it, on the whole site or on particular sub-pages or on pages that use a particular template. And there's the cookie choice then.
Okay. Thank you very much, Michael Buchele. Now let's get one from the chat. It's from Marcus Baumüller. What happens if someone denies a required field? I assume normally if somebody does not fill out the required field, you cannot submit the form, but yeah, perhaps he meant something else. I think that's about it, no?
That's a little bit of a conflicting input in the form then. You should probably make those required fields required, and the form will first say, please fill in this field, and will then ask for consent. What you saw there in the form example, when I submitted the contact form, is I first filled in the field, clicked the submit button, and the consent question came only after. That may be a little bit weird, and we thought it was a little weird too, so we're going to make it so that the consent question comes before you hit that submit button. We'll probably put that consent message next to the field itself. Say, yeah, I'm okay with you using my email address for this purpose. Yeah. So that as a polish item, that will come in a moment.
Exactly. That would help. Okay. We have 3 more from anonymous attendees. Let's go read the first one. Will these changes seamless work with Forge modules like Form2DB? I'm sorry if I'm mispronouncing it.
Just thinking that through. I'm not quite sure. We'll have to check it. The Form2DB is a nice implementation where you can submit a form and that data is injected into a particular workspace in Magnolia. So it kind of collects form data like you would collect in Google Drive or you would collect in a remote system. We'll have to get back to you on that and see what adaptations would be needed.
If you don't mind, you can write us a chat only addressed to us. And yeah, so we'll know who you are because it was sent anonymously. So your email address, that will help us out. Okay, thank you. Second question, how would I recognize changes in the cookies from third-party services, like, for example, share button services or advertising servers?
If you set the cookie script, the script that sets the cookie with the marketing tag, you have control over it. Yeah. But if it's something on your site that you don't control in marketing tags, you don't control on the Magnolia server side, then basically you don't control it. Okay. If it sets cookies, then they are kind of beyond your control. So I would recommend that you use either of the 2 methods, try to control them as a marketing tag, set them through the Java API, or what we're going to deliver next is some sort of helper for those folks who are working in a template script to check. Let's say that the logic that sets the cookie is in a template script or in a JavaScript model, that they could also handily from the template script check, do I have consent to set cookie? Do I have consent to set this type of cookies? We don't have that feature in the product right now, but we're considering it for the next step.
Okay, good to know.
Yeah.
Why can you send a form without SSL? Should it be required?
Probably.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. And we have the final one. Is there any REST API for external systems to check the allowed field or data?
Not yet.
Not yet. All right.
Will come.
Okay, so that's about it for the questions. If you have more, you can always send Auntie an email, or is that your Twitter address?
Yeah, you can.
At Phenotype.
There's the email address right there.
There you go. Auntie.hietala@magnolia-cms.com.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm very curious on what your clients say as you start implementing these features. Is it enough? Is it something that needs a little bit of improvement? Does it work okay for marketers? Is it obvious for marketers what fields were consented to and what not? So I'm curious to hear back. Give it a spin. Yeah.
All right.
I hope this was informative.
It was very informative. I learned a lot myself. And yeah, it's always good to know new things about Magnolia, about GDPR, and things like that. So let's wrap this webinar. Thank you everyone for attending today's webinar. We call it GDPR. Can you repeat the title for me?
Modern privacy controls, yeah.
GDPR, modern privacy controls in Magnolia. So thank you very much for attending. This has been Cass and Auntie. Thank you very much and have a nice week ahead. Have a lovely sunny afternoon ahead. Goodbye.